Hi, this is Scott Aronow, scenic designer for the Chekhov Dreams Theater Row in the Beckett in New York City. And I'm talking to Dave Lefkowitz of Dave's Gone By on UNC Radio.
Welcome back to Dave's Gone By on this pre-birthday show here in the neighborhood. Now, you all know how much I love the theater. I talk to actors and directors and playwrights all the time. I've been a playwright, I've been a theater critic, an actor to some extent as well. The one piece of the puzzle that I've never been able to do and never been comfortable with is like design. I painted flats for a couple of little theater companies many years ago, and you can probably tell that the flats were painted by an amateur, even though it was just one color. I do not have any skills in that direction, which is why I'm always fascinated to talk to people who are into the design aspect of plays and musicals, folks who can create the lighting and the costumes, and in this case, the set design. We're going to be talking to a scenic designer who's worked for the Williamstown Festival, Shakespeare Theater of New Jersey, the Huntington Theater Company. He's done stuff at the Fame School, a bunch of high schools, opera companies too. He's currently designing the set for an off-Broadway play called the Chekhov Dreams, and it's being done at the Beckett Theater on Theater Row right in Midtown Manhattan from now through the middle of February. And best of all, our guest in the neighborhood is my own first cousin. His name is Scott Aronow, and he's with us on the phone. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Dave?
I'm good. I'm great, man. So congratulations on this new project. But you get projects every couple of weeks now. Is that true?
It comes and goes. It rains and pours, or when it rains, it pours. At the moment, I don't have a ton on my plate, but there are times I've done as much as 19 shows in a year once upon a time. Now it's not quite as much as that, but there are a bunch, and they usually overlap,
Now, when you say you've done 19 shows, it means you've drawn up the designs and the scales and whatever. How much of the physical set construction are you expected to do?
Expected to do, it sort of really it varies depending on the scale of the production. It really comes down to how much money they have. On a well-funded show, that's not really my job. I'm more of an architect than I am a contractor. I draw up the plans. I start out with sketches and then move on to like formal like architectural blueprints. I do all like the color elevations, which are how you sort of tell the painters what you want them to do. I'll help choose props and set dressing and stuff like that. And if the production is sort of like well funded and well staffed, then there's a technical director and a production manager and a team of carpenters and welders and riggers and all those people who actually build the scenery and paint the scenery, and I sort of oversee and supervise.
So you physically at least are there. You have to go down to the place for a week or two, wherever the theater is, and be there as they're building, as they're painting, as they're shining lights on things to see how they look.
Well, you have to be there for the installation part, not the whole build, because depending on how they're set up, they might build over the course of several weeks. I'll visit where they're building the scenery. They'll send me pictures. I'll comment, and we'll have like lots of we'll do like Skype meetings, and I'll go and check it out. And then when the scenery is actually being installed in the theater, I will be there with them, helping to figure out how it fits in just perfectly and solving problems as they arise. And something doesn't fit properly, how do we adapt it and stuff like that. And then there's the whole process of the actors come in, and then we have to figure out how do we modify the rehearsal, all the stuff that they've done in a rehearsal studio without the scenery. How do we modify it to fit the scenery? And I'll sit with the director, and we'll sort of put our heads together, and exactly where does this couch go, and how does this get from point A to point B, and be there for the rehearsal process, and then usually throw in my paint clothes and help do touch-ups and any detail stuff that needs to get done, and just be hands-on, do whatever they need.
And is it all-consuming? Is it like you have to work on one project at a time, or sometimes when you did like those 19 shows in 1 year, were you working on something in the afternoon, something else in the evening?
Yes, it's more like that. Like at the moment, I have the Chekhov Dreams, which is loading into the theater on Monday morning, and I have a show at a high school in California that is doing Newsies, and I am currently doing the paint elevation. So I did all the...
I'm sorry, the what elevation?
To paint it in my absence.
Oh, okay. Wait, did you say the paint elevation?
elevation or color elevations. It's just basically it's like a coloring book. I take the architectural drawings and I just color them in like a coloring book, and then say this is what I want them to look like.
Oh, I didn't know why they call it elevations or...
Well, the elevations are the front view of any blueprint. Basically, it's not like a real photograph of the front of anything because it's flattened so that you can sort of measure everything. So it's a view of something from the front, basically.
Oh,
called an elevation.
I did not see. This is how much how little I know about design in terms of the theater. So at what point? How old were you when you realized you could draw?
Well, as you probably know, my mom is an art teacher, and so drawing has actually been something that's been with me forever. There's never really been a point where that wasn't something that I did. My mom used to be a public school art teacher. She's taught private lessons. She's does all sorts of stuff, and one of the things she did was teach all the kids to draw. So that was something that's just always been with me.
But at what point did you realize that you weren't just a kid who could draw pretty well, but had a real knack and talent that could be applied to the arts?
Well, so the time when that became relevant for theater, I always used to just draw, sit at home and draw. I used to draw on the margins of my homework. Drawing was just a major part of my life, but it was a solitary thing. And I got involved in theater when I was in high school. My other big creative interest is I also play the piano and I love music. And I had a lot of friends who were musicians in high school and artists. And when I was in high school, that's when they sort of came together, when one of the friends that I knew from music sort of introduced me to somebody in the theater department, and they said, hey, we really need someone to paint this backdrop, and I know that you can paint. Do you want to try that out? And it was Bye Bye Birdie, and they have this Penn Station backdrop, and I said, yeah, sure, how hard could that be? It's just a painting, but it's just really big. And I didn't realize that when you scale something up from 8.5 by 11 inches to 35 feet wide, it's totally a different process. I made every mistake in the book that you can make, and it took me forever. Nearly killed me. I didn't sleep for 3 months. I got pneumonia when I was done, missed a month of school. But by the time I was done, I was just hooked on this big collaborative process because, it's fun to draw. I love drawing, but when you draw or you draw scenery, when you're finished with it, you don't just frame it and hang it on your wall. It actually gets up and sings and dances for you. So that was sort of a revelation for me.
And by the way, for folks who are interested in seeing the kind of work that Scott does, you have a really beautiful website that people can go see at scottportfolio.com. Scottportfolio.com. It's just pictures of a bunch of your shows, and the website is gorgeously designed, as it ought to be for a designer. But it's very, very cool. And also kind of makes me want to... So by the time you got out of high school, you knew that design was your place, and you went to Boston University for design.
Yes, they have a theater design program. Most of the places that have a real serious acting conservatory also have a design conservatory associated with it, where you just basically spend 4 years in college focused kind of like a laser beam on learning all aspects of putting on a show from the technical standpoint.
So what did you learn in college that you hadn't already glommed by doing this scenic design in high school?
One of the things about doing the scenic design in high school was that it was less scenic design and a little bit more everyone pitching in and figuring out how to do it based upon the stuff that you have laying around. So
yeah.
My job was more along the lines of painting flats that other people pulled out and put together, and having some opinion over that. But the idea, what you learn in college is that the way to design a show is you take a script, you read the script, you sort of analyze it as best you can, sort of in a dramaturgical kind of way. You discuss it with the director, what the needs and the wants of the production are, and then you just sort of do your research, you do drawings. It's that big collaborative process where you tweak things and come up with the ideas yourself. And that's what you do in college in these paper projects, where you just sit in the classroom and you do it again and again and again and again. And you every couple of weeks you read a new script, you come up with new ideas. Ultimately, we're building scale models and not full sets for each one of the shows. But and then you just practice it, and also you just get to see the way professionals would put something together, and the standards are totally different, and it's time, it's not true anymore, but at the time they shared a theater space with the Huntington Theater, which was a professional theater company, or is a professional theater company. And so when we weren't working on student shows, they would hire us as over-hire labor to do the professional shows, and you'd work alongside guys who have 20, 30 years of experience and just see the way they do things, and it's sort of very eye-opening about the difference between professionals and kids.
Well, that must have been huge. Do you have one or two designers of a Broadway theater or regional level that you've, I don't know if idolized would be the word, but that you look at and you go, oh, they're the pinnacle. I want it to be like them. Now you almost are, but yeah.
Thank you for suggesting I'm almost there. But there's a guy that he's maybe like 7 or 8 years older than I am, actually, who I worked for at the New Jersey Shakespeare Festival when I was still in college. I've assisted him a bunch of times, and he does amazing work. He does tons of original stuff. His work is gorgeous. His name is Michael Schweigart, and we used to be pretty good friends. I haven't seen him in a while because he moved to Philadelphia, but man, his work is gorgeous. He's so outside the box. It's a combination of really beautiful aesthetics and really unusual decision-making.
Ooh.
Yeah, so if you ever see his
can
stuff
you give
around.
a specific example of what you mean by that?
Trying to think of some good examples. Just the way he sort of deconstructs things and, what's missing, what's present, the way he sort of, because really, in theater design, unlike film, you really can't show the whole world as it really is. You're finding ways to break it apart and show the audience enough to give them the idea of what's going on, but you really can't create a totally photorealistic environment most of the time. Sometimes you can, but not usually.
Yeah.
Just to see what you choose to break apart and what you choose to show, like where things are missing and stuff. It's kind of hard to describe, but I haven't seen one of his shows in real life in a while. But just figuring out, you have a very limited amount of space. How do you create this environment? I'm always surprised by what he does. You should look him up. Look up his portfolio. I think his portfolio is actually msportfolio.com because if Aronow is hard to spell, Schweigart is impossible. So.
Hey, have you ever, come to think of it, have you ever designed a production of Glenn Ross? Because there's a character in there named Aronow.
You know what? I haven't, and that's on my Netflix list of shows to see because I don't think I've ever seen it or read it. I think I might have been assigned to read it in college and possibly blew it off.
Well, watch the movie is great. The movie it's truly a great film and a pretty great play too. But I just thought, oh my God, it would be because there's a namesake in there.
Really?
Well, I'll still watch the occasional TV show, and if somebody says the name Lefkowitz, I jump up and down screaming. It's like, yay!
I feel Lefkowitz is a slightly more common name than Aronow. Aronow is like an odd variation of Aronov.
Oh.
But I've very few Aronows out there.
Well, are your since we're talking family here, since this is my pre-birthday show and you are a cousin, are you also like Russian Polish extraction in the background? Having that, tell me about your family so I can make sure I can connect how you are on my family tree.
Well, so I think we're second cousins.
Oh, we're second. Okay.
Because my mom and your dad are first cousins. So, right, like your grandma, Lucy, right? Your grandma was Lucy, right?
Was, yes, yeah. One of them, yeah.
And my grandma was Arnie, and they were sisters. We grew up not so far apart from each other, but, my family moved to Westchester, and you stayed in Long Island, and we kind of lost track. It's sort of like, it's not so far away, but I feel like, in our family, there was sort of like a 5-mile radius that all the moms were willing to drive. And once you get outside that radius, it's like you see each other like 3 times a year. You go from like your first cousins, Adam and Stephanie. I grew up with Adam and Stephanie. We used to play together like every other day. I was all at their house, and they were at my house. I moved to Westchester, 40 minutes away, right on the other side of New York City, and then I see them once a year.
But it's not on the Long Island Railroad, dude. That's or you have to go from the railroad to Penn Station and then boom up to Metro North. It's virtually impossible.
It's a schlep. You gotta right into the city. You switch train stations, go all the way across town, and then a second train station. But driving, it's like if there's no traffic, it's 40 minutes.
By the way, how are your parents, Judy and Richard? I guess Judy's retired?
Yeah, my mom stopped teaching ages ago. My parents are pretty much retired. My dad has some real estate stuff going on, but they're stay-at-home grandparents. They spend a lot of time with their grandkids, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So I have a daughter, Hannah, who just turned 6, and a son named Michael, who's going to turn 2 in March.
Mazel tov, and they're healthy and good and happy and stuff.
Yes, they're doing great. Hannah's in 1st grade. Michael is right upstairs hanging out with our babysitter. They rotate. They spend days with the grandparents. I mean, today my parents are going to pick Hannah up after school and take her out for the evening, take her out to dinner, hang out with her. They love doing that. They have Michael on Thursdays. And then my sister has a couple kids out in Seattle in a few weeks, as soon as my show's done. And I don't think they're scheduling things in order to be able to see my show there, but they are scheduling things to be able to watch my kids while I'm working in the city. As soon as my show's done, they're going out to Seattle to see their other grandkids.
Oh, I mean, it works out. So you must live pretty close to everybody, like your sister and your mom.
Yes, yeah. We live in the suburbs now. I lived in the city for about 13 years, and about 4 or 5 years ago, my wife and I moved to the suburbs. My wife's a pediatrician, and it's a little bit of a saner life, especially for her. Being a doctor in the city is like really crazy and stressful, but it's easier in the suburbs.
But do you think that the move to Westchester has cost you anything in terms of being in the heart of the action and trying to crack the major off-Broadway or the Broadway niche? Or you were there for 13 years and it was like, I'm getting the work that I'm getting?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, I think that it's a combination of that and having kids and living in the suburbs, and it's a different lifestyle, and it's a little bit of a challenge to overcome because when you live in the city and you do theater and you're young and don't have kids, it's a 24-hour employment. I mean, really, everything just goes all the time, and rehearsals go to 11 o'clock at night, and then after that there's a production meeting, and you got to be somewhere early in the morning, and you're just running around, and sometimes you stay working on something till 3 in the morning, and to be able to do that without checking your watch and make sure I can catch the last train back to the suburbs, or wait, I have to make sure the babysitter can stay late, or my wife's getting home from work, it definitely changes the way you approach a job, and you start thinking a little bit more about like, okay, well, I have this much time to work on this before I have to be home for dinner. So yes, it is certainly easier when you are immersed in the action and you could throw yourself into it 150%.
But you don't necessarily miss the crazy, because you're in your late 30s now, I assume.
I just turned 40 4 weeks ago.
Oh, happy birthday to you as well, then.
Thank you very much.
Do you feel different? Do you feel 40?
Yes, I got a lot grayer in the last 4 weeks. No, I don't particularly feel any different than I did a month ago. But it is funny that you do notice like the absolutely crazy things that you did when you're 20, which doesn't really even seem that far away. I remember the all-nighters very clearly and all the wackiness and walking miles carrying 2x4s on your shoulder up and down city streets and carrying lumber on the subways and cans of paint. Like, when you find yourself doing that now, you're like, wow, this is so much harder than I remember it being. In fact, I was actually doing that yesterday because the guy who's building the set for me for Chekhov Dreams had picked up a bunch of plexiglass at a plastic supplier down on Canal Street and brought it to our meeting, and then he had to bring it way uptown, and I said, I got a car, so I'll drive you uptown. He said, great. The only problem was my car was parked 20 blocks away from where our meeting was. That's like, a mile and a half.
Well, yeah.
But, a mile and a half is a lot harder when you're carrying a couple sheets of plexiglass down the street. So, we had to stop and rest several times, and we're like, wow, this used to be easier,
We're talking, by the way, with my cousin, Scott Aronow, the set designer of theater and opera. He is doing a show called The Chekhov Dreams, a play by John McKinley. That is at the Samuel Beckett Theater over on Theater Row. It's right 410 West 42nd Street. That's an address I just know by heart forever. 410 West 42nd Street, right between 8th and 9th Avenue in New York, running from January 26th through February 17th. So you're going to want to get to... Can you tell us just a little bit about what the play is about?
Yeah. First of all, it actually is a fantastic play, and you could believe me, because I actually don't say that about most plays I work on. I'm I try and take myself out of the advertising process, because I work on a lot more shows than actors and directors do, because I could stack them. I could an actor could only be in one show at a time, right? Yeah. Same thing with the director. So I work on a lot of shows, and a lot of the new scripts are sometimes you're like, maybe this will be good. I cross my fingers. But I actually read the show, and I thought it was great, and I'm really happy to be involved with it. It is a dark comedy, a dark romantic comedy. Ooh. Is how it's described. And it's about an aspiring writer in New York City who is trying to get over the loss of his girlfriend. She passed away in a car accident, and he's severely depressed. And basically, she visits him in his dreams. And he sort of is having a hard time moving on because she's constantly there all the time. And he has a sort of degenerate younger brother who's sort of a drinking, drug-using womanizer who's basically trying to help his brother and get him out of his apartment, out of his depression. And he ends up signing up for an acting class and gets assigned to do a play by Chekhov as a scene study with a partner. And so he's this process of meeting people and getting out and getting involved in theater is enabling him to sort of like put his problems in perspective and move on from his deceased girlfriend, who will not leave him alone because she keeps popping up. And Anton Chekhov actually is a character in the play who shows up and comments on the action and has interactions with the characters, and it's actually incredibly funny.
Okay. Well, I mean, you said it was a dark comedy, but yeah. Let me ask you though. So I can see the lighting designer having a lot of choices to make in terms of when Chekhov is on the stage, when the ghost of the girlfriend is on the stage, as opposed to quote unquote the more reality stuff. But were there decisions that you had to make for the play in terms of or is it all realistic-ish? What did you have to do?
That's actually, that's a good question, because that's kind of the crux of the design for both scenery and lights, because, part of the cleverness of the way it's written is basically playing with the audience sense of what is real and what isn't. Because, he doesn't really have a great sense of what's real and what isn't, as he's sort of, his dreams and his realities are kind of colliding, and he doesn't really know, he's trying to move past the girlfriend, but he keeps showing up, and her presence is messing with his reality. So that's one of the things that we have to figure out. That's one of the surprises of the design, is trying to play with the audience's expectations about what's real and what isn't. Because, the way any audience, they sit down to watch a show, they're kind of taking what you're showing them literally, or they're trying to find a way to take it literally, right? Like they're trying to say, okay, you believe what you're being shown. So when you show them something abstract, the audience goes, okay, I'm watching an abstract play. When you show them something realistic, they then take that and say, that's the kind of play I'm watching. But if you start to mix the elements, you can sort of mess with the audience's expectations, and that's kind of what we're doing.
Well, there's that moment pretty well known from a few years ago. There was a Broadway Glass Menagerie, not the most recent one with Sally Field, but the one before that. And there was a decision made by the director, and I guess in cahoots with the set designer. When I think Laura first appears in the show, she actually comes out of the couch, because it's a memory play in that sense. So they're mixing a little bit of the real and, because, it's a gritty kind of realistic, they have this shabby little apartment and a fire escape, but they wanted to have that moment of making it seem like she's coming out of Tom Wingfield's mind, right, by her sort of emerging from the middle of the couch.
Well, that kind of stuff that's one of the more interesting aspects of set design. I mean, lighting is very ephemeral and very intangible, so everything's abstract with lighting to some extent, unless you're talking about a lamp or a chandelier and reinforcing that light. But with scenery, you literally have to put a physical, real thing on stage, and so an abstract thing, it can be a little jarring to the audience, and you have to make some really hard decisions. And as I was saying earlier before, all theater is inherently abstract because, it's not like watching a movie where you can, you're sort of in it and it looks exactly like what it will look like in real life. You're looking at a stage where one wall has been cut away and you're sort of staring in, but it never really looks like real life. And the actors can't talk like it's real life because they have to project, so you can hear them. It's always a little bit heightened and a little bit abstract, and you have to make lots of decisions as to, how far do we want to go with this? Do you want to take a realistic play and take it in an abstract direction just to make a comment on it, or, I tend to think that, my primary job is really just help telling the story. I want it to be clear to the audience what's going on, and I want to maybe augment and add to whatever it is that the director's already trying to do. If he wants a moment to be scary, my job is to make it as scary as I can. If he wants it to be, comfortable, my job is to make the environment as comfortable as I can make it, to help the audience deal with what's going on and sort of really picture it. Every now and then you add another layer of commentary, and you're doing something that is not exactly part of the story, but it's because you're making a statement about it, and that gets a little dicey. It's because you could actually sometimes take away from the story when you're doing that.
Do you have an example of a show where you you tried something and you were like, don't know if the audience gets it, or it should have worked better than I thought it would work better than it did?
That's an interesting question. Well, if I sort of modify your definition of I and make it we, as in the production team.
Sure.
There's certainly times where I did a production of Into the Woods where the director really wanted to make it. He wanted to set it during the Blitz in World War II with a bunch of orphans sheltering from the falling bombs and telling each other's fairy tale stories.
Okay.
And, it was very sort of C.S. Lewis, Lion, Witch in the Wardrobe, which is, children had been evacuated during the Blitz and are living in the country, and that's where the story comes from. He wanted to do something like that. And it started out as a cool idea, but it was one of those the framing devices that just got hard to maintain. It starts out with the kids are in these little orphanage beds, and they're using the things in the orphanage to tell the story. But then we started coming up with all sorts of problems, like, is everything that they use to tell the story something that they found in the orphanage? Or are some things magical, and are some things perform multiple purposes? It started to get very complicated logically. We started getting ourselves tied up in knots.
Yeah, I remember the swastika beanstalk.
Right, exactly. What is the beanstalk? Well, the beanstalk's just a beanstalk. Well, why is there a beanstalk? If we're pretending that the bed is a rock, why aren't we pretending something is a beanstalk instead of just having a beanstalk? Aren't we starting to break our own rules here? So we kind of worked ourselves into a bit of a corner.
Now flipping away from the negative, is there a moment or a design that you did for a production that had to solve a problem in the story, in the musical, in the play, and you came up with this ingenious idea, and you're like, oh man, I thought of that, and perfect?
Well, it's funny because every show has some variant of oh, that's the problem. How do I get around this? Sometimes they're big decisions, sometimes they're little decisions that make big impact. I had a production of Rigoletto that I did in a church in Rhode Island. And I got in to see the space before doing the show, and it had a little tiny stage in a church. So it's in a big empty space. There's a little tiny stage, and under an arch, and in the back of the arch there are these choral risers that started at about 5 feet up and then went to 15 feet up. And I was like, what on earth am I going to do with this? I can't put the show on this little stage. It's tiny, and it's just like a mountain of platforms. So what I ended up, the director had this idea. His idea was, I want to see the head of the Duke, kind of like an evil monster, watching the proceedings of the whole action, the whole play. He's messed with everybody's lives, and he's watching it all unfold. And so what I ended up doing was making what was originally conceived to be like the body of a snake. It was a long, winding staircase that went up these choral risers and went way up into the air. And the top of it was the head, sort of was an abstraction of the Duke's head looking down on everything. It did not actually read to the audience, I don't think, like that. I don't think the Duke's head really read the way the lights hit it, and it just wasn't clear. But it was an interesting use, because people were very impressed with the use of the space, because instead of going wide or deep, which I couldn't do, I went up. So all the action is taking place in vertical space instead of horizontal or otherwise. So that was an interesting problem solved. A similar one, another one where I thought it was a tiny solution but had big impact. So did a production of Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat in New Jersey, where the conductor was on stage with the orchestra all upstage behind her, and she had like a little it was like a little bandstand decorative thing, a little scalloped shell kind of thing in front of her.
Yeah.
And she was sitting on a little stand, and in the last moment of the play where it says Joseph came to Egypt in a chariot of gold, which is usually done, he's in a chariot drawn by lions with wings, that's how they usually do it. This little bandstand scalloped shell-shaped thing, the scallops separated and became the wings, revealing a lion head behind it, and Joseph stood next to the conductor, and this little unit disengaged from the conductor and just rolled down stage. So he just sort of moved towards the audience in a chariot that sort of just came right out of the orchestra. It was a pretty cool moment, and it was actually really easy because we had one of those raked stages where it slopes down towards the audience. We didn't need any automation. We didn't need any magic. It was just gravity. There was just somebody behind the chariot feeding through with a rope, and he just rolled down stage with his little lion chariot. That was kind of cool because it's like, well, how are we going to get this thing on stage? Where's it going to come from, you know?
Well, that's another question for you as a set designer, Scott Aronow. It's, do you prefer having kind of a limited budget and having to be really imaginative, or are you kind of happier when you go to a place like maybe doing an opera? And it's not like they're throwing money at you, but budget isn't that much of an object. If it needs to get done, you got the money to do it.
Yeah, I like being creative and having money. That's the answer to that. Money is
you must
always
be Jewish.
better.
Yeah.
There are always challenges in every play just by the nature of the way they're written. And I'd rather, say, can we do this? And have the production manager go, yes, we can. Rather than, ooh, no, that's too expensive, sorry, So there's no circumstance where I would like to have less money.
Okay, fantastic answer, man.
Challenges are good, though. I mean, like it's one of the things that make a show fun. I mean, it's interesting because there's a lot of classical theater where it all takes place in one location, and that's cool, and it's certainly easier to design something that's in just one location. But one of the things you really want to do when you're designing scenery is you want to find a way to surprise people. And if you could do something that's like, oh wow, I didn't expect to see that coming from over there. That's the goal, make people sort of eyes open a little wider. So,
well, I've had my ears open wider and been going, oh wow, this whole conversation with my wonderful cousin, Scott Aronow. Please, everybody, go see the Chekhov Dreams. It's off-Broadway at the Samuel Beckett Theater, right in Theater Row. So there's a theater complex of like 6 different theaters on 3 levels in the Theater Row Theater. It's running from January 26th through February 17th. For more information about Scott Aronow, you're going to want to go to scottportfolio.com, scottportfolio.com. And so I guess last couple of things for you, Scott, is since again, this is, we're both recent birthdays. I got mine in a couple of days.
Yeah.
You've just had yours last month. Gotta go for some more family stuff. So tell me about, like, my Grandma Lucy's sister, Arnie, because I vaguely remember her. Mm-hmm. What do you remember about her?
What do I remember about her? I thought she was fantastic. Although one of the most significant issues about her was that she was severely hard of hearing. So, and I think she was like that from when she was fairly young. This wasn't just because of old age. She just always had hearing problems, which meant there was just an enormous amount of yelling in her presence. And it might have sounded like people were arguing, but they weren't necessarily arguing. Everyone just sort of screamed at each other all the time.
No, it sounds like Judaism, basically. That's what it is. It's
which is not so uncommon in a Jewish family, right? There's just an enormous amount of screaming all the time.
Well, wait, so, and what about, she was married to whom? Well, your grandpa, but...
Right. Sam, it was his name, Sam Merkin, but he died a very long time ago, long before I was born, I think in the 60s. So I never got to know him. But but my grandmother did at various points live with me. And I had a step-grandfather for a little while. She married this guy named Irving fairly late in life, like in her late 60s, who didn't speak very much. He was sweet but kind of grumpy. And, usually like a cranky old man with giant glasses and a hat who liked to sit in a dark room with a little tiny book and read, and no one knew what he read. He didn't talk very much. I didn't dislike him. My siblings didn't like him very much because of the grumpiness. But and my grandmother used to make fun of him all the time, and I thought that was hilarious. And it wasn't super witty. She would just call him a grumpy old man, and I thought that was really funny because I'd never heard like one grown-up insult another grown-up before. And then he would shush because he was trying to read. But they were the slowest moving human beings on earth. They really, when they lived with us part-time, they'd go to Florida the other part of the time, but they moved like, you wouldn't believe how slow they would move. It's like they would just shuffle their feet slowly on the ground, and they like to take walks, and it would take them just hours to get down the block. And I don't remember this firsthand, but my mom told me that there was one day where I went to school, and I left my clarinet at home for clarinet lessons, and I called the house, and the only person there was my grandmother, and she said she would bring it to me, and my school was like 2-3 blocks away. I mean, as an adult, you could probably walk it in somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. But apparently, it took them the entirety of the day. Clarinet there. So they were kind of a funny old couple in that sense. She was very, very sweet. And you never knew when she understood what you were talking about, partially because she was really, really old. I mean, she was born in 1905. So she was extremely ancient. And she didn't hear very well. So I think there was a lot of bluffing that she knew what you were talking about. So there used to be a lot of phrases like, fancy that. How do you like that? And I think those were just like, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm sure it's wonderful,
They're placeholders, and believe me, I lost some hearing in one of my ears a couple of years ago. So I've lost the top and bottom frequencies in my right ear. Oh, wow. So if I'm in certain restaurants or certain places ordering food somewhere, there are times when I do the, yeah, I hear you nod. Or right. If my wife is talking to me and the television is on in our living room, and she, her voice is competing with the sound of the television.
Sure.
She'll get the nod. She'll get. I need a catchphrase. That's what I need.
Yeah. Like fancy that. I always thought was great.
Fancy that, huh? Yeah. I got to work on that.
That's a good one. Apparently, my grandmother-in-law, my wife's grandmother, who died like just as we were starting dating, so I never actually met her. She spoke Yiddish. Not as a first language, but she spoke it fluently. And so whenever you told her something that she thought was amazing, she'd go, it's a neue Welt, which is Yiddish for it's a new world. That was her go-to, that's amazing phrase, which also could sort of be like I think that was kind of what fancy that meant,
It's a neue Welt.
I'm so old, everything is amazing to me,
Well, it's just been amazing talking to you. I'm so glad I asked about the family stuff. Might as well ask you, since I've still got you on the phone, how'd you meet your lovely pediatrician wife, Rachel?
Yes.
How did you meet her?
How did I meet her? So, I met her doing pretty much the only thing I did back then, which was theater, because we're actually from the same town. We both grew up mostly in Scarsdale, New York, Westchester County. We're 4 school years apart, so we were never there at the same time. But we lived about a mile apart from each other, and Scarsdale used to have a summer theater company where they would put on shows, and the actors were mostly teenagers or college kids, and then the people who built the scenery were also local volunteers, but it was run by professionals. And so after I graduated from college, I actually got hired to design the scenery for Crazy for You, gigantic, ridiculously oversized Broadway musical. And she was in the show and did tech on the side and did all sorts of stuff. So we met then. We kind of became friends. She was still in college. I had just graduated. And so we became pretty good friends. I actually didn't know it at the time, but apparently she had a big crush on me. But nothing came of it because she was in Rhode Island. She went to Brown. And I had just moved to the city. And so we kind of stayed in touch over the course of the years after the show was done. And a couple years later, she graduated. She moved back to the city. And I used to play in a band. I had some friends, and we'd play in some sleazy bars in the city and stuff like that. I played piano. And one day I with some friends. And after the show, we went out for drinks, stayed out till 4 in the morning, and that was it. That was our first date, and that was in November of 2004.
2004. So, and you got married when?
December of 2006. So we just had our 11th anniversary.
As Rabbi Saul Solomon would say, Mazel Tov, and Mazel Tov, of course, on the children. Now, let's see, your children are not older than 11. So
no, the oldest is 6.
Yeah. So you did it the right way.
We did the right sequence. Yes.
You make an honest woman of her.
I did.
And you have made an honestly happy radio broadcaster out of me by being with us in the neighborhood today. Scott Aronow, congratulations on all the projects that you're doing. Congrats on the Chekhov Dreams, which opens in just a couple of days, January 26th. And then
Friday.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, January 26th runs through February 17th at the Beckett Theater between 8th and 9th Avenue, right on Theater Row. And find out more about Scott at scottportfolio.com. Scott Aronow, my cousin. Give my best to your parents, to your wife, and your kids.
Absolutely, and you too. Give your best to Jody and your parents too. I haven't seen in quite a while. I hope they're all doing well. Oh,
well, yeah, well, we'll talk.
I think your dad's sort of not great, but you got to give him my love because your parents are wonderful.
They're pretty great. They're pretty. And I'll give Joyce your love too, my wife, and all our potatoes and all of that.
Did I call her Jody? I'm so sorry. I haven't seen either of you guys in person in a very long time.
Yeah, I have a cousin Jody. You may be thinking of that, but my wife is Joyce.
I do know Joyce, and I know just we haven't managed to hook up. I've been in Colorado and you've been in New York, but never in the same place at the same time. So.
Dude, we've got to, and I might be doing, too early to say now, but maybe in 2019 I might be back in New York doing one of my shows again.
That's fantastic.
If you can design something for like $20, I can even hire you to work on it. So
I'll do whatever I can.
Scott Aronow, thank you so much, man.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. I'll talk to you later.
You betcha.
Bye. All right.